Peter ask me questions so that I can answer. How did it all start, or what you want me to say? But basically, our organization is Charter Schools, which is a spin-off of. We feed off of a public school budget, but we kind of have a little bit of freedom in what we do. So we use that freedom to do something that Peter and David have done in Australia, and all our schools are basically built upon two very valuable principles, which are our mission and vision and philosophy, which is project-based learning and social emotional learning.
So Angie, when we walked around, or if any of the people that are with us today walked around, if they walked around iLead, what would they see? How would it be different from most schools? This is in a pre-pandemic situation.
Yes, of course. So I would just describe it as very chaotic. Everyone who comes, learning really is messy, and it's unpredictable. So really that's exactly what you will see. It's very loud, people are moving around. And of course there's different variations from school to school, but ideally our vision and where we want to get to is exactly that. We do have a formula, and for the people that joined earlier, I really appreciate you had our visual learning engine put over there. We have tried to implement spatial organization based on a very amazing research by David Thorndike, which is published in a book called From Campfire to Holodeck. Basically what this university professor did is he observed what the students were doing when he was lecturing, and what he noticed is that after 20-ish minutes roughly, half of his amphitheater was empty. So he observed that this was quite a usual occurrence. So he said, I'm just gonna go after them one day and see what's happening. Of course, due to his open-mindedness and proactive stance, he found out that they're not slacking, the students are not going actually out to be on their cell phones or to be social or to just ditch class. But what he noticed is that some students were outside with their notebooks taking notes or reviewing things. Some kids were researching. Then you have 2 or 3 kids working together. Then you have another bunch of group of students in the corner working together. And then he went and he said, I don't want to disrupt you, but I'm really curious, what are you doing? And he started this whole research of what's happening with the human brain and what is the human need for interaction as social beings during learning. So what he realized is that we can indict people with information for their age plus minus 5 to 7 minutes. But the reality is we cannot lecture 2 people for more than 20 minutes, because after that, what he realizes, we have few needs. One is the introverted people need to process information internally. They need a pause, mental break, and they need to stop. And we call that a physical cave. And you witness at some of our schools, we actually have physical cave. We have built a cave where the kids can go in and be on their own or be with just one person just to process information or to learn on their own. Then we have the watering hall, which is the main space where people and kids get together to feed off of something, which is the information giving platform. Then we have the campfires, which is small groups where people and kids meet together to reinforce information, to practice skills, to share information, to discuss about something. So that spatial organization is very vivid, and at some of our campuses too much, where we don't have walls. We have literally broken down the walls. And another shocking thing for educator is every time that they come, it takes usually 24 hours to make it or break it, as we call it. Either they quit in the 24 hours or they say, yeah, this is what I need and what I've been wanting my entire life.
And I think that's one of the things that we noticed when we walked around. Unlike many schools that, they could be any institution. They could be an old people's home. They could be a prison. They could be a hospital. When you walk into iLead schools, they look like places where young people live. Like it's really built around the young person, which I think is fantastic. So Angie, you and I were talking a little bit earlier about how California moved into this remote learning state. Do you want to give us a brief rundown on that?
Sure. So It's very interesting that our governor Newsom was very proactive. First off, when we only had 3 to 7 cases in California, and the population is California is huge, he immediately ordered all public organizations shut down, all public parks shut down, malls, public beaches, because California is full of beaches and we use the weather all the time. So that was priority number one. And the interesting thing was that no one knew when it will happen or whether it will happen. So what was important for us is that our executive team and founders started off a conversation after we got the scare from China and when Europe started showing drastic measures about the spread of the virus. So around February 20th, they had a conversation as executive team saying, we don't care what happens. We need to have a contingency plan. We must transition, thinking that we will transition. In our heads, we must virtually transition into something that will look like distance learning. So let's figure out the plan. How would that look like? Interestingly enough, trickling down to fast forward the information from February 20th, March, I believe it was 19th, which was the Friday, we just trained all our staff saying, as a precaution, we want all of you to know we will use something called Power School, which is a learning management system, just like any other learning management system. None of our staff have ever used it before. I'm talking about the site-based schools. None of the kids have ever used it before, none of the parents. But we said on that Friday, we're just letting you know that this might happen. And if that happens, here's what we're going to use and here's what's going to happen. That was on Friday 19th. Sunday, the governor released the information saying on Monday, kids and staff cannot come back. So we don't have school. So what we did was we just released the information on Monday. Don't panic, we're ready. And it's actually what we always do. We had learners teaching learners, our facilitators, which are our teachers, our administrators, which are our directors, became learners again, and hand in hand with our staff, we just jumped into this new reality world. But I must say that one of the best things that probably defines who we are is one of our design principles, which is the D in iLead, the design thinking. And if you are fanatic about design thinking, you know that you always start with empathizing and empathy about the problem. So this was no different than anything that we do. So really where we started the platform to bounce off of was empathizing with everyone, empathizing with how our teachers might feel, how our parents might feel, how our students might feel. So week one, we really just devoted on that human connection and human touch, understanding, helping families understand that through this social distancing, the only thing that keeps us apart is the physical appearance of someone and proximity. Everything else was the same. So
we thought in Australia, we thought we had a tight time frame, in terms of moving to that. It was announced on the Sunday and it was implemented on the Monday. So I guess I was talking to an educator today, and we were talking about what should the focus be, on literacy and numeracy. And my comment to that person was, perhaps let's just get the engagement happening in an online, remote sense first. Get that established, make sure that everybody's got connectivity before we just jump back into that literacy and numeracy as a key focus. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I would say, Peter, there is few steps that are really important. And number one is as an educational leader, you must start with assets and strengths that you have as a school and as an organization. That's number one. If your school or entity or whatever it is, it's defined by core values that are empathy, nurturing the whole child, compassion, trust, respect, responsibility, then how can you immediately jump into literacy and all academics if that is what defines us as an organization? So the first step is always defining what your asset and strengths are, almost kind of like an inventory run. Do you have teachers, leaders on staff who effectively use Google Classrooms or whatever is online? Is there a person that's working on with long-term or short-term staff? Do you have a tech team? Do you have someone that can assume that role? How can you get free resources? What resources are available out there? So number one is starting almost with a school or organization inventory of identifying and sticking to our vision and mission. And it doesn't matter whether we're in distance learning. So for an example, if we are all about project-based learning and social emotional learning, we cannot jump online with traditional schedule where we keep block schedule or subject by subject and just start teaching out of nowhere. Aside from the fact that our families are already going through a shock, let alone transitioning into something that they're not used to, will further distance them from what they are. And then the second thing is distributed leadership. It doesn't matter what kind of organization we work at or in times of this, distributed leadership capacity is a must. We must activate our whole team. And we have those conversations about how about our support team, which is kind of like the TAs, the teacher assistants. How about our special education that are hourly? How about our maintenance staff? So believe it or not, we troubleshoot together with them. We said, you know your role, you know your capacity. Please help us keep you busy and also valuable for our kids. So that is what we have done. They have undiscovered their talents for remote teaching. Like we have live virtual classes for family meditation, family mindfulness. We have later on, I'm going to share an entire website called iLead Through Play, where our certified play-based staff does live Zoom play-based activities that you can do at home remotely. She's hosting it from her own house. So it's just a matter of conducting that inventory and distributing the leadership into it's no longer me and me directing what you're going to do, but please let us know how can you serve us through this time that it's most convenient to you. And then the regular distributed leadership also includes monitoring different areas of the programs that we're rolling out. We cannot just roll out a new learning management system if we don't have establish a family communication channel or more of those, student services, technology use, standards alignment and rigor, where does that stand? Assessment, check-ins, how does it look like virtually, and so on. And then the third step is communication. There must be streamlined communication, and also starting with what have we done so far? Are they email blasts? Is it Parent Square? Is it Facebook Live? Is it group? Whatever it is, we must establish that, and they must be multiple channels through which we regularly communicate. And then the last step is just operations. How do we make sure that all of this functions, which is, I always go back to Peter Senge's systems thinking, and I believe that everything is part of a system, even if it doesn't know it. And within a system, everything affects everything else. So unless as leaders, we, or educators in general, we think with that systematic thinking hat, that no matter what we do, every action triggers another action, then we will have a positive success if we know that our actions trigger other actions.
And I think that's really interesting that the default position of iLead was to revert back to an empowerment stance, whereas, we've been in a number of webinars recently where people have talked about organisations that were previously relatively progressive, and they've actually reverted back into a more command and control style. So it's been a centralisation of power, whereas your natural response was to re-empower and even broaden people's individual ability to act.
It's true, but again, there's underlying principles for that. First is we use Love and Logic and 7 habits at all our schools. And one of the 7 habits is being proactive instead of being reactive. And I think in times of this, people that have been trained in trauma and resilience understand the fight or flight. And in this kind of situations, even for leaders, no matter how much we have been trained, it's almost like post-traumatic stress, that it's our human instinct to go into the flight mode or to go back to just making sure that everything is okay, to the command mode, because thinking that that will balance us as leaders, knowing that we have control and knowing the situation, instead of distributing the leadership and trying to gain control over systematic thinking where I can say, okay, I'm okay, I have systems developed. But then again, it's not the humanistic nature that we believe. We got to believe in systems that we play in place. And then the second thing is, as I said, the 7 habits, it's really easy for people to be reactive. I mean, as a parent, when your child does something silly, the first reaction and instinct is to just go with them. But then for a second, if you think, you say, wait a second, that's a reaction to something. And then you go back, and that's the proactive thinking when you try to analyze what happened in order to come up with a rational and reasonable solution instead of just being reactive. So those are 2 other probably advices for educators anywhere and in any kind of capacity, that think of every decision that you make and every action step that you take, whether it's a reactive or proactive. And the second thing is whether we're trying to go into that fight or flight mode. Are we really fighting and understanding what's happening and trying to come up with a solution beneficial for everyone by listening to everyone? Or are we just trying to ignore the problem, get away from the problem, or insert control for easy way out?
David Chapman is pointing to the fact that earlier on in the conversation, you spoke really clearly about the philosophy of the school, and you mentioned the cave and the campfire and the other elements that make up that philosophy. And he's wondering to what degree you have been able to, or are thinking of keeping those things alive in an online space.
Oh, interesting. Yes, thank you for that question. That's a really good question. So that is where all our hourly team came aboard. So what we do online is, unlike any other school, we don't have schedules. We don't have traditional schedules. The kids don't meet with facilitators, which are our teachers for math, for ELA, but we have live Zoom connection times, which are devoted to teamwork. Our facilitators get them together and divide them into groups and teams. So the same thing happens. We have said to everyone, our asset is that we don't lecture kids. So don't lecture them online. Don't think that you gotta prepare and come up with lectures. So for almost 2 weeks, we just went into connections mode. We did just mindfulness circles, mindfulness connections and conversations. We just read stories together, articles together, and we did a lot of mimicking of the physical spaces that we have, which is using Zoom breakout sessions for individual processing and for group work. Another great thing that we have done, we were thinking a lot about check-ins. The littles cannot upload things on their own and submit assignments for K1 or transitional kindergarten. And then for our remote places with diverse socioeconomic situation where internet is spotty, even if they get it free right now, we have to be very creative. Again, thinking about mission, vision, and philosophy, what would we do? So what we did is we said you can physically check in and showcase your work to a facilitator one-on-one. You can do it by snapping a picture with your phone, because everyone has a phone. So you can snap a picture with a phone and text it to someone, email it to someone, just to showcase your work, your thoughts, your ideas. And then the third thing that we have done is implement daily journals. So we really understand that even if kids and families don't know, everyone needs a self-reflection time of the day. So we have for a lack of better expression, impose that happens at least 5 to 10 minutes a day. You can find your cave. So literally we have used those words, roam around the house. It's that time that you need to find or build your own cave, a space, and then we define the physical space. How should it look like? And try to at least once a day visit that space. And facilitators give different reflection questions that the kids can use, but basically they're geared towards well-being, to help kids get unstuck, unlock, and also stimulate positive thoughts and positive thinking, because families now are locked at home with some of them 4 to 6 kids, and mom and dad are home. So it's tough time, but we try to think of that, and that's how we use the lens of physical space arrangements.
So Angie, how do you go about, like it's been announced on the Sunday, how do you actually contact 6,500 students, and what determines whether they've been contacted or not?
Yeah, so On the Monday, what we did is we send an email. So there's regular channels that we use. We have each school site has their Facebook page. So that was number one. We send a blast on Facebook page. Then the second thing was email. Then we also have a text message and phone conversations channel where each site director recorded a message and sent a voicemail, also text. But week number one, we built a system where we communicated from all the executive leadership all the way to each facilitator and support staff member, that the job and responsibility for all facilitators, which are the teachers in week one, is to make sure that they see physically each child on a computer. So whether it's on the platform, and if they're struggling, on a FaceTime, via text message. So just making sure that in our background minds, the bottom line was that we have valid and reliable contact for each child, and each child and family member is accounted for in week one.
Having spoken to a number of leaders, they've said, no, look, we've sent newsletters and that's been great. You know, I know if I was in that position, I would need each family to be contacted by phone or by a human being. I don't think email, or personally, I just don't think email or any other communication really cuts through as well as actually speaking to a family.
Mm-hmm. So at our remote schools, we have a family that's homeless. And it's not just one, but we have an entire school called Empower Generations for Parent and Pregnant and Teens, which that has been one of the hardest. But in times like this, everyone got a phone and access to a phone. So thank goodness that has been good. But we have a team that drives around in a van and leaves materials. And again, not packets, materials literally in a box, and they get so excited, even if they're in high school, because those kids are pregnant or they're already teen parents. So we'll leave them a box with wellness things to do, with some easy things, crafts to do at home with their kids, with some literacy information, with some free resources online that they can do with their kids or on their phone. So we're trying to think of when you are a parent and you're at home with your kids, and now let alone you can't physically go to school or leave your child in a daycare. We as iLead family have to figure out a way to combine education with your well-being at home using your priorities right now. And I always say Maslow before Bloom. We can't expect kids that are not self-regulated in terms of physical, emotional, and social well-being to perform using Bloom's levels of performance. So let's take care of Maslow first. And when we know we are at that level, we can start combining and slowly integrating academics and rigor. And for other kids that don't have a way of contact, we have that too. We have a team that drives around in a van and also leaves in front of their door, because we don't have contact with them, but we just physically leave it. And then every Friday, they pick up if the family has a message or if they have something to ask and things like that.
I do love that, Maslow before Bloom. I think, you know, there could be a small tattoo coming that says that. What for the teachers, like, you know, as you said, if they've survived 24 hours as a teacher or as a facilitator in iLead, then they're probably good to go. They're your people. But, you know, so they're already change positive, they're already adaptive, they're already student-centered. What have been the challenges for the facilitators?
So very interesting question. And I'm so happy to talk about that, because I offer that online teacher support every day for 2 hours. So it's really interesting. I'll just go to a few cases just to paint the picture, but we have extreme brainiac on our team, Deja Man. She is such an amazing scientist, but also person with humanities talents. But she's all over the place, because that's the beauty of project-based learning. Her class is always messy. Everything is always in the process. The kids are super engaged. And physically, when she's in a space, she really needs a team in order to function according to deadlines. So what happened with her was that over the weekend, as soon as we got online, she wanted to scratch everything that's on the platform that we offered as support and as resources, and to build everything from scratch. And we're like, oh, okay, sure, go ahead. So Sunday comes, 9 p.m., and she called one of our online coordinators saying, I need help, I can't do this. And then the online coordinator went in and she said, oh my goodness, what have you done? There were like 5 shelves of courses with so many resources and so many ideas. So that was one shock of, when you go in a class, it can look messy and you can have 7 to 10 things going on at the same time because you're stimulating that inquiry based. But then when you're online, you got to think of, all right, what will the kids see? Number 1, how will they interpret it? Number 2 and 3, will they really understand my message, and will my message come across as I wanted it? Second one is really on a positive probably, but we had some introverted facilitators that needed a lot of coaching and a lot of support in a classroom, because I said, it's very chaotic, and we don't prescribe curriculum, we don't give pacing guides, we make sure that everyone plans project, and we assign mentors for that. So we have had few facilitators that were still struggling with that were either brand new or they're still in their teaching credentialing programs, that have become rock stars online. I go to shadow their courses and I think, who are these people? And some of them teach kindergarten, and 100% of their kids, 26 kids in class, log in almost every day. So it's really interesting. And what I really think, Peter, is that after all this is gone, I think education finally will revolutionize instead of changing and evolving. We don't need an evolution because evolution doesn't work. We needed revolution. And I think this is it.
One of the things that I would like to mention, having spoken to some educators in South Korea who have been doing this remote style for a while, they said one of the learnings that they have is that teachers can easily overwork in this new environment. They because they, in many schools they've got this focus on control and assessment, and so they're setting assignments or they're setting tasks, and then they're being submitted, and there's this sort of, the teacher then feels that they're expected to read it all. So many of them who are still teaching synchronously, they've got still 5 out of 6 classes in the day that they're delivering and preparing for. And then they get this flood of work, which they feel like they're expected to read all of it. And the message came through loud and clear is to set the number of hours that are right for you, and you stick to it, and have this expectation that, yes, I've cited some work, but you don't necessarily have to read everything that is sent to you, because it's just unmanageable, unworkable.
Yes, the overworking hurdle, it's probably in the burnout. It's one of the worst fears, because people think, oh, it's okay, I can sleep in, I can work in my pajamas, but also it's a double-edged sword. Sometimes you don't know when to stop, or by the time you stop, you look at the clock and it's 6 p.m. So a few tips for all the leaders out there that are leading educational teams, even universities and colleges, is number 1, create small teams. Partner up, thought partners, like facilitators and educators, everyone from administration all the way to the bottom. We have something called ILPs, individualized learning plans, and we do them as adults too. And we have thought partners for the ILP process, which means every week or bi-monthly, I must check in with my thought partner on the goals that I set as adult. But now during times like this, I would say at least once or twice a week, to make sure that they partner up teachers so that they can piggyback off of each other. And at the same time, once a week, have smaller teams and reiterate the expectations. First is, schedules must be flexible. We cannot expect that a human being will sit at a desk, at a Zoom conference call for more than 2 hours. Even 2 hours is ridiculous. My butt hurts. Not really what our kids need right now. I mean, even as adults, like, let's examine ourselves first. Try to internalize and say, will I be okay if someone lectures me right now, no matter what it is? So hold office hours for kids. Like, if you really as a school have the need to have physical contact and see kids and keep the schedule, open the block where the facilitators, teachers can be there as a floating workshop facilitator. You need something and I'm here. Do you want me to explain something? I'm here. But don't make them lecture. And then use the multimedia options. Use flipped classrooms, use Flipgrid, use choice boards for content so the kids can pick and choose, educators can pick and choose. There's so much, but the key word is flexibility. We must be flexible. And another premise that comes out prevalent from this situation is the things that kids will remember the most is the passion projects and the passion that they explored during the quarantine time, rather than the things that we shove at them as must learn this. So why don't we use this time for genius hour, inquiry-based, design process, design thinking things where we let kids really explore what their passions are, what their qualities are, or what they aren't, so that they come out as a better, stronger person after this, rather than someone that practices math problems and does book studies and things like that.
I think we've seen anyone that's been involved in the homeschooling movement, initially the first thing parents try is to replicate school at home, and that usually lasts about a week. And it lasted a little bit longer. My understanding in as many of the Asian countries that stopped direct schooling, the kids being slightly more compliant, lasted 2 weeks to moving into 3 weeks before they had to drop that. So just a warning out there to anyone who's doing synchronous learning according to a timetable, you're in for a very rude shock. Angie, can I ask a question for the leaders in the school? And we're not talking about necessarily the technical challenges, because I think we're all facing those. But as a human being, as a person, what have been the challenges for the leaders in the school?
A lot. As you know, especially in charter schools, probably in Australia in private schools too, anywhere, leaders are overworked, period. Non-stop all day long. We're dealing with behavioral problems, with discipline problems, but the biggest challenge is being connected to your team. Social isolation for educational leaders is a killer. To begin with, I think one of the assets that each educational leader possesses is being extremely sociable, at least for profession. Like they might be social introverts, where after work they go into their cave in isolation, but during work they need people, they need teams. So for that too, thank you for asking me. Part of our systems is that we have virtual support for all our teams. So every day for 2 hours, we have open hours for facilitators, which are our teachers, with educational expert, which is someone from the online, someone from the tech team, and someone from the maker team over there, so that we can coach them through anything, coach them through personal problems, coach them through technical difficulties, coach them through online solutions, whatever they need.
Just one suggestion. I was just thinking as you were saying about that support. I think for leaders, if you're watching today and you're a leader in a school, I think the old days of being the stoic hero that just carried the ship through and, you were bulletproof and that sort of thing, we know that we're going to be at least doing this for all of term 2. There's a fair chance that much of term 3 could likewise be like that. If you haven't got professional supervision like they do for psychologists and so on, I'm suggesting that you reach out and you get an actual psych support. Whether you think you need it or not, you might be surprised. So I'm going to be promoting that anyone that's in a significant leadership position has professional supervision of some sort once a week, once a fortnight. Whether you think you need it or not, I just think that's good practice. Angie, you touched on it before. We've got 3 minutes left because we are going to break on time. What do we take away from this? Like when we start moving back into the new normal, what do we take from this experience?
I think we just seize the opportunity as educators to reimagine and implement education as it should be. And as someone that started partnering up with you and trying to establish this global network, I think if we all push together, one takeaway is to keep penetrating the walls of standardized testing, of traditional schooling, because we can now not only see and know but even the authorities know that it's not working and it actually can work without it. Because today I just read an article where all universities of colleges in less than 2 weeks have figured out how to do college and university admissions without testing, without grades, final grades for seniors. So if that can happen for 2 weeks without standardized testing and grades, we can only imagine what can happen with education as its own. So I would say probably it's not kind of like the takeaways. It's more of a call to action to all of you. Let's fight this fight and not forget that things happen for a reason. And maybe this is our call for action. Let's continue this fight and make sure that we move education towards whole child education and what they need.
Sounds very much like No ATAR 2020, which we have 18,000 signatures there, folks, at the moment. Don't be dismayed if you actually look at, this is an Australian issue, Angie, but if you look at what the Education Council came out with yesterday, it's nowhere near as bleak as the media would have you believe. They're certainly open to changing the system and potentially not continuing with ATAR, but under the current set of circumstances, they're taking a conservative approach. So, thank you, Angie, so much for your time. It's always a pleasure spending time talking with you. Thank you, Angie. Let's give Angie a round of applause.
All right. Say hi to everyone. Dá empolho, but there is a blowing kiss. Say bye, everyone.
See ya. Bye-bye.